What happens when a beloved Hollywood icon, known for grace and quiet intelligence, decides she's done playing polite and chooses live television as the moment to draw a line? What happens when Emma Watson, usually composed and careful, looks across the table on The View and locks eyes with Whoopi Goldberg, and the air in the studio suddenly feels too tight to breathe? Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk, hit like, and comment right now, because moments like this don't just happen, they explode. The studio lights were bright enough to feel warm against the skin, the kind of brightness that makes every blink feel exposed. The audience had settled into that familiar buzz, the low hum of anticipation that comes when a major guest walks out. Emma Watson stepped onto the set with a polite smile, the kind that had been trained over years of red carpets and press junkets. She waved, nodded, thanked the crowd, and took her seat at the long table. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back slightly, fingers resting near her mug, watching Emma with a look that was calm on the surface but unreadable underneath. The other hosts smiled, shuffled their cards, adjusted their posture. This was supposed to be another thoughtful conversation. Films, feminism, advocacy. That was the plan. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. The first few minutes flowed smoothly. Emma spoke about her latest project, about storytelling and responsibility, her voice steady, measured. The audience nodded along, some applauding softly at familiar talking points. Whoopi chimed in with a comment that sounded supportive but carried an edge, the kind of edge you only notice if you're listening closely. "And you've always been very vocal," Whoopi said, her tone even, "about telling people how the world should work." Emma smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I try to talk about how the world could work," she replied. "There's a difference." A ripple moved through the audience. Subtle, but real. Whoopi tilted her head. "Is there?" she asked. "Because sometimes it feels like Hollywood talks at people instead of with them." The table went quiet for half a second too long. Emma inhaled, slow and deliberate. Inside, something shifted. You could almost feel it, the moment when restraint starts to crack. "I think," Emma said carefully, "there's a difference between speaking from experience and dismissing concerns because they make us uncomfortable." Whoopi's eyebrows lifted. "Are you saying I'm dismissive?" Emma hesitated, just a beat. Cameras zoomed in. Millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens. "I'm saying that sometimes powerful voices, especially ones people trust, have a responsibility to listen as much as they speak." The temperature in the room changed. One of the hosts shifted in her chair. Another let out a nervous laugh that didn't land. Whoopi set her mug down slowly. The sound was soft, but in that silence, it landed like a punctuation mark. "I've been listening my whole life," she said. "Long before you were on a movie set." Emma nodded, but her jaw tightened. "And I respect that," she said. "Truly. But respect doesn't mean silence. And it doesn't mean we excuse harmful narratives just because they come from experience." The audience murmured now. You could see heads turning, whispers exchanged. This wasn't the friendly discussion they'd expected. Whoopi leaned forward. "So now I'm pushing harmful narratives." "I didn't say you were," Emma replied, her voice firmer now. "I said we all need to be careful about the narratives we normalize, especially on platforms like this." A producer off-camera shifted, sensing the shift in tone. The hosts exchanged glances. This was live. There was no cutting away from this. Whoopi crossed her arms. "You know, there's a difference between activism and accusation." "And there's a difference," Emma shot back, surprising even herself with the sharpness, "between criticism and deflection." The word deflection hung in the air. The audience gasped softly, a collective intake of breath. For a moment, Emma's mind raced. She could pull back, smooth it over, say something safe. That was what she'd always done. But something about the way Whoopi's words had landed earlier, dismissive, heavy, had flipped a switch. "I've watched this show," Emma continued, her voice steady but charged. "I've seen conversations where valid concerns get brushed aside with jokes or generalizations. And when that happens, people watching at home feel small. They feel unheard." Whoopi's expression hardened. "So now you're lecturing me on my own show." "I'm asking for accountability," Emma said. "From all of us." The applause started from one corner of the audience, hesitant at first, then louder. Another section stayed silent. The divide was visible, almost physical. Whoopi shook her head slowly. "You come in here, you sit at this table, and you act like you understand the weight of this seat." Emma met her gaze. "I understand the weight of influence," she said quietly. And I don't think any of us are above questioning. That was it. The breaking point. The tension that had been simmering finally boiled over, and everyone in the room knew it. The friendly interview was gone. What remained was raw, unscripted confrontation. The camera cut to the audience, faces wide-eyed, hands frozen mid-clap. Social media feeds were already lighting up, though no one in the room could see it yet. Tweets were being drafted. Clips were being clipped. A moment was being born. And as the host tried to jump in to regain control, it was clear this was only the beginning. The smiles were gone. The gloves were off. And whatever was about to happen next would follow both women long after the studio lights dimmed. The interruption came too late. The moment had already slipped out of anyone's control, like a glass falling off the edge of a table in slow motion. One of the hosts tried to steer the conversation back, her voice light and practiced, but it floated uselessly between Emma Watson and Whoopi Goldberg, neither of whom was willing to blink first. Whoopi let out a short, humorless laugh. "You know what gets me," she said, shaking her head, "is when people think passion gives them permission to talk down to others." Emma straightened in her chair. The polite posture was gone now. "And what gets me," she replied, "is when experience is used as a shield against criticism." The audience reacted immediately. A few claps. A few audible gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh wow," loud enough for the microphones to catch. The studio felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were leaning in. Whoopi turned her body fully toward Emma. "Let me tell you something," she said, her voice dropping, rougher now. "I didn't get here by ignoring people. I got here by surviving things you read about in textbooks." Emma nodded slowly. "I don't doubt that," she said. "But survival doesn't make any of us infallible." The word hung there, infallible. Heavy. Dangerous. For a split second, Whoopi looked genuinely taken aback. Then her eyes narrowed. "So what exactly are you accusing me of?" she asked. "Say it plainly." Emma hesitated. The room waited. This was the moment where she could soften, retreat into diplomacy. You could see it on her face, the calculation, the risk. Then she exhaled. "I'm accusing you," she said, choosing each word carefully, "of sometimes dismissing perspectives that don't align with your own, especially when they come from younger voices or marginalized groups who don't have your platform." The audience erupted. This time it wasn't polite applause. It was sharp, divided. Some clapped hard. Others sat stiff, arms crossed. A few boos cut through the noise. One of the hosts leaned forward. "Okay, let's." Whoopi raised a hand without looking away from Emma. The host froze mid-sentence. "You think I dismiss young people?" Whoopi said, "Baby, I am the reason some of those voices even get airtime." Emma didn't flinch. "And that's exactly why it matters," she replied. "Because when you minimize certain concerns, it signals to millions of viewers that those concerns don't matter." The cameras zoomed in tighter now. You could see the tension in Whoopi's jaw, the way Emma's fingers curled slightly against the table. Neither woman was smiling anymore. This wasn't television banter. This was personal. Whoopi leaned back, crossing her arms again. "You come from a world where you can say whatever you want and walk away," she said. "Some of us didn't have that luxury." Emma's voice softened, but only slightly. "I know privilege exists," she said. "I talk about it constantly. But acknowledging privilege doesn't mean staying silent when I believe harm is being done." "Harm," Whoopi repeated, almost incredulous. "You think my words are harming people?" "I think words always matter," Emma said, "especially when they come from someone people trust." That was the nerve. The audience felt it. Trust. Influence. Responsibility. The invisible weight of public platforms pressing down on the table between them. A producer's voice crackled faintly through an earpiece somewhere off camera. Time cues were being ignored. This segment was running long, and no one dared to cut it short. Whoopi shook her head. "You know," she said slowly, "there's something dangerous about this idea that disagreement equals harm." "And there's something dangerous," Emma countered, "about pretending words don't shape reality." The exchange had become a rhythm now, strike and counterstrike. The hosts sat almost forgotten, reduced to witnesses. One of them glanced nervously toward the camera, offering a tight smile that no one returned. The audience noise swelled again, then died down as Whoopi leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You want to talk about reality," she said. "Reality is messy. It doesn't fit into slogans or social media posts." Emma met her halfway, leaning in too. "And that's exactly why conversations like this matter," she said. Because when we simplify complex issues on platforms this big, people get hurt. There it was. Hurt. Not abstract anymore. Personal. For the first time, Whoopi looked genuinely angry. Not performative. Not playful. Real. Don't put that on me, she said sharply. I've spent decades fighting for people who didn't have a voice. And I respect that, Emma said again, her voice steady but urgent. But fighting doesn't stop just because you've been doing it a long time. The audience went silent. Even the clapping had stopped. All you could hear was breathing, the faint hum of studio equipment. This was the kind of silence that feels louder than shouting. Whoopi stared at Emma, searching her face for something, arrogance, maybe, or naivety. What she found instead seemed to unsettle her. You think you're the first person to challenge me at this table? Whoopi asked. No, Emma replied. But I might be one of the few willing to stay uncomfortable. That line hit hard. A few people in the audience audibly reacted. Someone whispered, damn. The host on the far end finally found her voice. Okay, we need to take a breath here, she said, forcing a laugh. This is clearly. But Emma wasn't done. Discomfort is where growth happens, she said, not taking her eyes off Whoopi. And avoiding it because it's inconvenient or messy does more damage than facing it head on. Whoopi exhaled slowly, rubbing her temple. For a moment, it looked like she might walk away from the table. The cameras caught it, the shift in her chair, the way her shoulders tensed. You know what, she said finally, her voice low, controlled. Let's be real. You came here ready for this. Emma shook her head. I came here ready for a conversation, she said. I didn't expect it to turn into this, but I won't pretend it doesn't need to happen. The clock was ticking. Producers were panicking. Social media was already on fire, though none of them could see it yet. Clips were being clipped in real time. Hashtags were forming. And as the tension refused to break, as neither woman backed down, it became clear this wasn't just a heated exchange anymore. It was a collision between generations, philosophies, and definitions of accountability. And the hardest part, no one in that room knew how it was going to end. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected, thick and uncomfortable, the kind that makes every small movement feel amplified. A chair creaked. Someone in the audience coughed and immediately regretted it. The host sat frozen, caught between stepping in and letting the moment breathe. Live television had a way of punishing hesitation, but it also rewarded truth, or at least the appearance of it. Whoopi broke the silence first, her voice quieter now, almost weary. You talk about accountability, she said, but you don't seem to understand what it costs. Emma didn't answer right away. She glanced down at her hands, then back up, her eyes steady. I understand that it costs something, she said. What I don't understand is why the cost always seems to fall on the same people. A murmur rolled through the audience. This wasn't just about two women anymore. It felt bigger than that, like something people had been arguing about at dinner tables and online comment sections for years, now compressed into a few tense feet of studio space. Whoopi leaned back, exhaling sharply. You're making assumptions, she said. You don't know who pays what price. Emma nodded. That's fair, she said. But when conversations shut down instead of opening up, the message is clear. And people notice. One of the hosts tried again to soften the moment. Emma, you've spoken a lot about learning, she said gently. Do you think there's room for different approaches here? Emma turned toward her briefly. Of course, she said. But learning requires listening. And listening requires humility, from all of us. Whoopi's eyes flashed. Humility, she repeated. You think I lack humility? I think, Emma said, choosing her words with visible care, that power can make humility harder. For anyone. That landed like a quiet explosion. The audience reacted in waves, some nodding, others shaking their heads. You could feel opinions forming in real time. Whoopi leaned forward again, her elbows on the table. Let me tell you something about power, she said. Power doesn't come from sitting quietly and hoping people do better. It comes from speaking up, even when people don't like how you say it. And I agree, Emma replied. But speaking up also means being open to being challenged. Challenged is one thing, Whoopi shot back. Being lectured is another. Emma's lips pressed together for a moment. If it sounds like a lecture, she said softly, that might be because this conversation is overdue. The audience reacted audibly to that, half applause, half stunned silence. A camera cut to a woman in the front row wiping at her eyes. Another shot caught a man shaking his head, arms crossed tight. Whoopi stared at Emma, really stared at her now, as if reassessing. "You don't think I've had these conversations before?" she asked. "I'm sure you have," Emma said. "But that doesn't mean they are finished." The tension shifted then. It wasn't just confrontation anymore. It was exhaustion, layered on top of anger. Whoopi rubbed her hands together slowly, a gesture that spoke volumes to longtime viewers. "You know what frustrates me?" Whoopi said. "People think they are saying something new when they are really just repackaging old arguments." Emma didn't smile, but her voice softened. "And sometimes people hear old and assume irrelevant," she said, "when really, it's unresolved." That word, unresolved, seemed to hit something. Whoopi looked away for a moment, staring out toward the audience lights. For the first time since the exchange began, her shoulders dropped slightly. The host nearest her leaned in carefully. "Whoopi," she said, "do you feel like you're being misunderstood here?" Whoopi sighed. "I feel like people expect perfection," she said. "And I'm tired of it." Emma nodded immediately. "So am I," she said. "That's why I think we need to stop pretending these conversations are easy." The audience quieted again. The energy had changed, less explosive, more raw. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about something closer to the bone. Whoopi looked back at Emma. "You ever been torn apart online for something you said?" she asked. Emma met her gaze. "Yes," she said simply. "Many times." "And you keep coming back for more," Whoopi said, almost incredulous. "Because silence feels worse," Emma replied. That earned a low, scattered applause. Even some of the skeptics seemed to soften at that. Whoopi nodded slowly. "I can respect that," she said. "But respect doesn't mean agreement." "I'm not asking for agreement," Emma said. "I'm asking for space, for nuance, for growth, for people to feel like their voices won't be brushed aside." Whoopi drummed her fingers on the table. "And what if I think some of those voices are wrong?" "Then challenge them," Emma said. "But don't dismiss them." The distinction hung there, delicate and dangerous. The hosts exchanged glances again, sensing the conversation teetering on a knife's edge, either toward resolution or another eruption. A producer finally flashed the warning light. Time was almost up. Whoopi noticed it and let out a short laugh. "Of course," she said. "We run out of time right when it gets real." Emma allowed herself a small, rueful smile. "That seems fitting," she said. Whoopi looked at her then, not as an opponent, but as a peer. "You're not afraid," she said. Emma shook her head. "I am," she admitted. "I just don't think fear should decide the conversation." The audience reacted strongly to that, applause this time, sustained and loud. Even some of the hosts joined in, clapping carefully, cautiously. Whoopi leaned back, crossing her arms once more, but the tension in her face had shifted. "You know," she said, "this isn't over." Emma nodded. "It shouldn't be." As the applause faded and the cameras prepared to cut, there was a sense, unspoken but heavy, that something irreversible had happened. Lines had been crossed. Truths had been aired. And whatever came next wouldn't stay confined to that studio. Because outside those walls, millions of people were already choosing sides. The moment the cameras cut, the room didn't relax the way it usually did. There was no exhale of relief, no casual chatter flooding back in. Instead, the silence lingered, heavy and electric, as if everyone in the studio understood they had just witnessed something that wouldn't stay contained to that hour of television. The audience stood slowly, some clapping, some stunned, others whispering urgently into their phones before they'd even reached the aisle. Faces were flushed. Eyes were wide. A few people looked shaken in a way that suggested they'd seen parts of themselves reflected in the exchange. Security shifted closer to the stage out of habit, not necessity. Tension has a smell, and it was everywhere. Emma Watson rose from her chair, smoothing her jacket with a hand that trembled just slightly. The adrenaline was still there, buzzing under her skin. She thanked the hosts politely, her voice soft again, almost startling in contrast to what had just unfolded. But her eyes were focused, distant, as if she were already bracing for the impact she knew was coming. Whoopi Goldberg remained seated for a beat longer, staring at the empty space where Emma had been. When she finally stood, she adjusted her glasses and offered a nod. Brief, restrained, unreadable. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't defiance either. It was something in between. Something unfinished. Backstage, producers scrambled. Phones buzzed nonstop. Assistants spoke in low, urgent tones. Someone pulled up social media feeds on a tablet, and the reaction was immediate. Hashtags were climbing at a speed no one could ignore. Clips were already circulating, cut and captioned within minutes. Emma was right trended alongside Respect Whoopi. Comment sections split clean down the middle, like a fault line opening in real time. Some praised Emma for her courage, calling the moment overdue, raw, necessary. Others accused her of arrogance, of overstepping, of disrespecting a woman who had earned her place through decades of struggle. And then there were those who didn't choose a side at all, people who simply said, this conversation needed to happen. News outlets jumped in fast. Headlines sharpened the moment into something more explosive than it already was. Heated clash on The View. Emma Watson calls out Whoopi Goldberg live on air. A generational divide exposed. The language grew bolder with every refresh. Emma's phone filled with messages she didn't read right away. Friends, colleagues, publicists. Some supportive, some cautious. A few warning her to prepare. She sat alone for a moment in her dressing room, the muffled sounds of the studio fading behind the door. She closed her eyes and replayed the exchange, not with regret, but with a strange calm. She had said what she meant. She had stayed. Across the building, Whoopi retreated to her own space, expression guarded. She'd weathered storms before, bigger ones, louder ones. But this felt different. Not because of the criticism, but because of who it came from and how publicly it had landed. She scrolled through reactions, jaw tightening, then loosening. Praise. Anger. Long threads dissecting every word she'd spoken. Every pause. Every look. She didn't back down. One comment read. Neither did you, another replied. By that evening, late-night shows teased the moment. Morning shows planned panels. Think pieces began to surface, less about the argument itself and more about what it represented. Power versus accountability. Experience versus evolution. Who gets to speak, and who gets questioned. The audience reaction echoed long after the broadcast. Clips racked up millions of views overnight. Comment sections became battlegrounds and confessionals at once. People shared personal stories, times they'd felt dismissed, times they'd been challenged, times they'd realized they needed to listen more. And in the middle of it all sat that table. That moment. Two women, both certain they were right, both unwilling to pretend the conversation was easy. Neither Emma nor Whoopi issued an immediate statement. The silence spoke louder than any press release. It let the moment breathe. It let people argue, reflect, project. And maybe that was the most unsettling part. There was no neat resolution. No apology tour. No viral hug to smooth the edges. Days later, analysts would say the same thing. This wasn't a meltdown. It was a reckoning. For some viewers, Emma became a symbol of a generation refusing to stay quiet. For others, Whoopi remained a reminder that history doesn't vanish just because language changes. And for many, the truth lived somewhere uncomfortably in between. What couldn't be denied was the impact. The show's ratings spiked. The clip became one of the most replayed moments of the season. Classrooms, offices, and group chats debated it endlessly. People asked themselves hard questions about power, about listening, about when to speak and when to pause. And maybe that was the real aftermath. Not the headlines, not the trending tags, but the discomfort that followed viewers into their own lives. Because once you see a conversation like that unfold, raw, imperfect, unresolved, you can't unsee it. You start to wonder where you stand, who you challenge, who you dismiss, and why. Now it's your turn. What do you think really happened at that table? Was Emma right to call it out so directly? Was Whoopi right to push back just as hard? Or did the truth live somewhere in the tension between them? Drop your opinion in the comments. I want to hear it. And if you want more explosive, cinematic breakdowns of the moments everyone's talking about, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk right now. Because the conversations that shake the room are the ones worth watching. And we're just getting started.